Okay, so let's get right into it. Over the last couple of days, you might have seen this startling idea popping up in headlines, especially in British and Israeli media. This concept of a new military alliance being called an Islamic NATO.
So is this a real possibility, or is it all just talk? Well, to figure that out, we're going to unpack the argument that's being presented in our source material. We'll explore the specific claims about what's really driving this potential massive geopolitical shift.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The source we're looking at claims there's this immediate and, frankly, forceful opposition coming from Israel. By starting with a claim like this, the narrative immediately frames this whole idea not just as a political move, but as a direct and existential security threat. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll follow the source's argument step by step, starting with the whole Islamic NATO concept. Then we'll look at the threats they supposedly see, who the key players are, the shifting global powers, the sense of urgency, and finally, the ultimate question of survival.
Okay, so where did this whole idea even come from? Well, the source points directly to a recent, very high-level meeting. We're talking about Turkey's President Erdogan and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman getting together, and that's supposedly the pivotal moment.
The analysis we're digging into argues this was no standard diplomatic visit. Not your typical handshakes and photo ops. The claim is that this was the foundational moment for a brand new military coalition, a plan born from this shared belief that the entire security structure of the region needs to change, drastically.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question. Why? Why would these nations feel the need for such a huge step? And why right now? Well, the source lays out what it describes as a multi-layered and, honestly, an imminent threat. At the very heart of this threat, according to this viewpoint, is a so-called hit list. The belief, as it's presented, is that after any potential conflict with Iran, the nations you see on your screen right now would be next. And that fear, whether you think it's founded or not, is being presented as the main reason to band together. In this quote, it's brought in to tap into some really deep-seated historical fears, which just fuels that sense of urgency. The argument isn't really about a new threat, but about the supposed culmination of these long-held anxieties about territorial ambitions, specifically this claim of a 2,000-year-old plan. Now we get to what might be the biggest piece of the puzzle, a fundamental breakdown of trust. The source argues these nations have completely lost faith in their traditional security guarantor, the United States. They've allegedly come to the conclusion that American protection just isn't reliable anymore, and that's forcing them to look for powerful new allies.
So if this new strategic bloc is for real, who exactly would be in it?
Well, the plan is described as a two-step process. It would kick off with a powerful core of three major regional players. We're talking Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. They would form the initial pact. But it wouldn't stop there. The next phase would be to expand, bringing in other major powers like Pakistan and Indonesia, which would massively increase its scope and strength.
And the core principle here? It's a classic. It's the very idea that underpins the NATO alliance it's being compared to. It's a simple but incredibly powerful commitment. An attack on one is an attack on all. Any act of aggression against one member would trigger a unified military response from every single one of them.
Now, this proposed alliance isn't just happening in a vacuum. The source claims it represents a huge pivot in global allegiances, a very deliberate turn away from the West.
Yeah, this image of the scales tipping really says it all. The proposal is a fundamental pivot away from that US-centric security framework that's been in place for decades. The source alleges this new bloc would look east, backed primarily by China's economic and military might, with Russia as another potential partner down the line.
And this is all presented as a pretty straightforward calculation of power. The analysis suggests these nations see China as the world's ascending power, the one that can provide the economic and military backing they believe the West either can't or won't provide anymore.
Now, according to the analysis we're exploring, this isn't some casual, long-term thing they're thinking about. The formation of this alliance is apparently seen as an urgent, time-sensitive necessity. It's a race against the clock.
Past events have reportedly shattered any illusion of guaranteed protection from outside powers. The source argues that incidents like the pressure Qatar faced have served as a really harsh lesson, driving home this idea that self-reliance and new, more reliable alliances are the only way forward.
And this brings us to the core strategic claim of the entire analysis. The argument is that the fates of these other nations are now seen as directly tied to Iran's. The logic is basically a domino theory. If Iran falls, they believe they're next on the list.
So that brings us to the source's final, and let's be honest, pretty stark conclusion about what is truly at stake here.
Ultimately, this whole perspective concludes that going it alone is just not an option anymore. The threat is presented as so great that the only path forward is through collective defense, a shift from traditional diplomacy to a posture of, quite literally, shared survival.
So while the formation of this Islamic NATO is still speculative, the source presents it as an almost inevitable response to a rapidly changing world. And it leaves us with a powerful and pretty unsettling question. In a world where old alliances are fracturing and new ones are forming, what happens when they are finally put to the test?